All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials World podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? It's November 2024 as of recording. It's going to be like fucking February when we release this episode. But at least for right now, I think you and I can both agree times are great. The fun is never ending. It's eternal. Would you agree with that, Brian?
Oh yeah, on a personal level, I think we all feel really good. Not only are times eternal, but there's really, I guess that's what eternal means. There is no end in sight. There's nothing catastrophic that's about to happen in the next, 15 years. Really, we are maybe not in a golden age, but we are in an age of the ongoing, is something I like to say.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? I looked up on Google because I was just like, I need to come up with more terms for this amazing age that we're in. And it turns out, Brian, there's a word that I'd never heard of before. It's called sempiternal. And I'm like, okay, that sounds great. I love Roman history. I love Gladiator. I love that kind of stuff, right? And it turns out,
Yeah, you're
Brian,
always dressed like a gladiator.
I am 100%. I always have like a thong on too, on top of it. I don't really like the bottoms that the gladiators wear, so I like my meat hanging out.
Yeah, it seems comfy, gives you a lot of breeze.
No, it really does, 100%. And like I said, apparently that word is associated with our favorite band, Bring Me the Horizon. Brian, a band that I know you love so, so much. They actually came
Yeah,
out with an album called Sempiternal.
Sempiternal. This sounds like what I continue to do for that OnlyFans girl after I found out she has a boyfriend. I enjoyed this album a ton. Yeah, I have a lot of history with this band, and I know, yeah.
So without further ado, let's review the legendary album from Bring Me the Horizon, Sempiternal. But before we review our album this week, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational Cringe Millennial. Woo! Yeah! All right.
All
And,
right.
we're talking about Bring Me the Horizon. We're talking about Sempiternal. That album came out in like 2013 or whatever. But Bring Me the Horizon have been a band since 2004. Just the amazing era, the era where John Kerry famously won the election and got rid of George W. Bush for us, right? And their
Yeah,
actual
he made a
first
great
album.
impression. He was very charismatic.
Yes, very much so. But their first actual album came out in 2006. And the cringe generational segment I want to do for this week is for the song, and to be fair, the album we're going to talk a little bit about too, but the song Pray for Plagues, which was the first major single from this band. Now, Brian, you were not really familiar with Bring Me the Horizon or this song.
No, I had one experience with Bring Me the Horizon in high school, which I graduated, which must have been when they were pretty new, because I graduated in 2010. So I was always trying to talk to the other weird kids at my school, even if I didn't really know them, and try to convince them to start punk bands with me. And this one really awkward but very sweet kid who, I don't know, he was in some of the same like specialist kid study calls as I, because I think he'd had some outbursts or something, but he was really nice, to me anyways. And we were talking about music, and he told me he liked post-hardcore, and I was like a big nerd. Like in the 2000s, I was like reading all about my own nerd shit, and I was not really hip to what was happening. And I was like, oh, I like post-hardcore too, thinking he meant like Fugazi. And then he said, oh yeah, I love Alisana, Seosin, and Bring Me the Horizon. And he brought me a Bring Me the Horizon CD to listen to. And I listened to it at home that night, and then I never talked to him about starting a band again because it was just so different from what I was interested in at that time.
Yeah, 100%. I'll be honest, never a fan of this band up until maybe a couple years ago when I actually tried listening to them. But I was never a fan of this album or this song. I've always hated this. I think it's terrible. I think it sounds garbage. It's clearly made by like teenagers in the worst way possible. I think this is fucking garbage. I'm going to be honest with you. Even though this is unarguably the best song in this album, it still sucks. Like, it's just so bad.
So
I hate it.
this is interesting to me because I listened to this album a few times this week, mostly yesterday and today in preparation for this. And not the album this is on, but Sempiternal, listened to it several times in the lead up to this episode. And then today, because you suggested I listen to the song, I listened to Pray for Plagues, and I immediately thought, this sounds so much better than anything on Sempiternal. And let me just clarify, this is not really in any way a scene that I have any investment in. It's not really my thing. In fact, when we get to the review, I have some observations about it that I'm really excited to share. But just from a sound perspective, not necessarily from a songwriting perspective, but just in terms of the production, it sounds so much more flattering than the production on Sempiternal. It at least sounds full and like kind of alive. So
that it blows my mind, to be honest. I completely disagree with you.
Yeah.
I think Pray for Plague sounds flat, boring, and limp as fuck. And I don't even think Sempiternal necessarily sounds strong either, but this sounds like a limp dick of an album and a song.
Well, okay, here's the thing. Pray for Plagues, and presumably the rest of this album, are victims of the loudness war, right? So everything's cranked up and, in a non-deliberate way. As in, not deliberately chosen, everything's just pushed way up in the mix. However, what I will say is that because they are, ostensibly a metal band, a hard rock band, a hardcore band, whatever, that at least can kind of trick you into thinking you're listening to something with some oomph. Whereas the Sempiternal album, to me, sounds so, I don't know, like flaccid. And from a production standpoint. From a musical standpoint, I don't really have any notes for this song because it's just not for me. Except for there are these really annoying little wah, 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 kind of like guitar squeal noises throughout that I just hate.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, though, is that, oh, God, it will, like I said, Count Your Blessings. I think I messaged you this maybe about like earlier this week or so. But I think Count Your Blessings is easily like a bottom 10, like quote unquote classic, like 2000s deathcore album. I think it's terrible. Like even bands that you don't like Job for a Cowboy's Doom EP, I think it's infinitely better than this from basically every single perspective. And I know that's a band you don't like.
I 100% believe that. After listening to this album several times this week, there is no doubt in my mind that Job for a Cowboy are better than Bring Me the Horizon.
No, that's totally fair. That's totally fair. But before we get into the album in details, I do want to mention these lyrics, Brian, because oh my God, you didn't look these lyrics up, correct?
I was going to, because actually when I review an album, I always read along with the lyrics the first time I listen to it, if not the second time, if I'm out on the train or something. But I specifically did not because you requested I not.
Oh, God, get ready. So, and remember, this is the first song on their very first LP, right? The lyrics start off like this. She starts her new diet of liquor and dick, just like Hollywood but laced and sick. The sun goes down and so does she.
These are like Descendants lyrics. That's the thing with like the screamo misogyny thing is like that in the 80s I feel like the skeezy punk bands could at least could have some effect, because if you're a band like the Descendants, you're like, we're nerds and we're whining, and that still sucks and it's sexist and all that, but it at least kind of makes sense. But if you're like, we're a tough screaming metal band and your lyrics are like that, it's kind of like, what?
And it even gets better, Brian. So, of course, that leads into just the nihilism of the rest of the lyrics. So the bridge is, so clap your hands to the sound of every firstborn dying now. Watch the rivers flow with blood. Death will stand where life once stood. Now, once again, that's because a woman fucks around. That's how this started, because a woman has sex.
Yeah,
do you think the world should end?
I want to annihilate society. Although I guess, like you said, they were in high school when they recorded this. That is how that feels when you're like 16 and you get cheated on, I guess.
I'm surprised this isn't more of like an incel anthem, to be honest with you, because that's what the fuck this is. This is an incel anthem.
I mean, it really is. The thing is that there are so many songs like with themes like that in this scene, and even the wider kind of Warped Tour scene of the 2000s and 2010s, that, they could almost all be incel anthems.
That's totally fair. And then also, I'm sure as you noticed at the very, very end, like the last 4 or 5 seconds, it ends with like audio bite from a porno where the girl says, "Come on my face." I'm like,
yeah, and
really?
I was like, why? And like, I don't have any issue with like stupid, like gross samples. I've listened to Mr. Bungle and all that shit, but it's kind of like why? But this is the type of thing that like a dumb like 16-year-old, like, I hate the term screamo, but I know that's how people understand this, like screamo band. They're like, oh, it's gonna be so funny. We're gonna sample this chick from a porno in our breakup song or whatever. That'll show her.
Fucking awesome. And before we once again get to the details of the actual album we're recovering, I do want to mention these song titles too, because I showed them to you. They're so bad. They're so bad. One of them is For Stevie Wonder's Eyes Only, in parentheses, in Braille. And the last song title on here is Off the Heezy.
Okay. This is
incredible.
I guess, so at the top of this pyramid, lyrically, you've got like not necessarily the same genre, but in the same sphere. You've got your Pete Wentz's and your Jared Ways and your Max Bemis's, right? Who even that stuff didn't age well and it's kind of obnoxious. But towards the lower end, you get someone like those song titles are some of the worst shit I've ever seen. It's like that, or like Cute is What We Aim For, where it's like, why are you trying so hard?
Yeah, no, it's fucking awesome. And maybe someday, Brian, we will review Count Your Blessings too. We won't, but maybe someday we will, but we won't.
Even those song titles, I was like, oh, this is the worst, like, elder millennial thing. A thing that's extremely validating for me is when I see, like, cringe millennial compilations, like, by Zoomers or whatever. It's all people that I would have made fun of at the time.
Yeah.
And it feels so validating to me. And that's, like, what song titles like that make me think of.
Yes. Well, speaking of all those things, Brian, let's finally get into the details of this album because I'm really so excited to get to our extremely differing views on this album. I'm so excited, genuinely. But once again, this is Sempiternal. Came out in 2013. It was performed by the band, once again, Bring Me the Horizon. And the personnel includes Ali Sykes on lead vocals and also, as I told you, the pretty boy of the band. I've been choosing albums recently by pretty boy bands. I don't know why.
I feel like though, so I don't like calling these bands metalcore because they're not metalcore, they're not Coalesce or Converge, they're not Race Trader. I don't like the phrase screamo because like lots of emo involves screaming and that's just doesn't mean anything. But like in this scene, and it's not post-hardcore, like it's not. That's Fugazi and fucking Shudder to Think and Gray Matter. But whatever this is, it is like a pretty boy genre. And I try not to say like, oh, that band got popular because the lead singer was like pretty to like teenage girls. But you look at some of these bands and you're like, well, I don't know what else brought them to this.
I mean, to be fair, though, I want to be clear, is even though this is not my favorite band of all time, they're probably my most, I would say, disparate band of a band that I like. Like, they make some music that I love and some music that I hate. Like, it's one of those things where, like, I don't think there's another band out there where I'm just like, I hate this, but I love this. And then on top of it, too, actually, their pop stuff is so much better than their metal stuff. Like, it's crazy how much better it is.
So, I've only heard this album and then the Pray for Plague song. That makes so much sense, though, because they clearly, like, should be a pop band. Like they're not metal guys. So they're not hardcore guys. So it's like the further they strip themselves of the illusions of that, I'm sure they became better.
No, 100%. And then speaking of people who also made that better, so Lee Malia is on guitars, Matt Keane on bass, Matt Nichols on drums, Jordan Fish on keyboard, synthesizer, programming, samples, and percussion, and then Jonah Weinhofen, who is easily the most controversial member of this band because, like, he played on a lot of their shit and basically got no credit for any of it. So there's, like, a massive lawsuit going on with Bring Me the Horizon and Jonah Weinhofen. So we'll see where the fuck that goes.
Them. That sucks.
Yeah, that's a real asshole thing to do. And to be fair, Ali was especially in the late 2000s and even up until around this album came out, was like a very infamous asshole in like the quote unquote post-hardcore and quote unquote like metalcore scene. Like he was a
scene
big
rife with assholes.
Yes. To be clear, not like the sexual misconduct type asshole, but like just the unpleasant asshole. Like that is the best way to describe Ali Sykes.
Like for a young person who's a rock star, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, you do kind of get a pass for that.
Yeah, I would say probably the person who I could probably most relate to him now as a celebrity. And to be fair, this guy's been infamous for 20 years now or whatever. But definitely somebody like Ronnie Radke, although not nearly as reactionary. That's probably the best way I could describe him.
I think the difference based on what I've read about Ali and Radke is like, he doesn't seem like, obviously Radke, as far as I know, is a worse person, makes music that is arguably worse, but also Ali, from what I've seen, he's not like trying to be an asshole, at least not recently. He is like, it seems like trying in his presentation, in his writing, in his whatever, to be like a cool guy. Whereas Rodkey, goddamn Rodkey, Ronnie is like so loves being just an absolute prick. And it's like, I know that that's fun sometimes, but he is like a hateful, bitter guy. And it's clearly consumed him and defined his life, which doesn't seem to be the case for Ali, as far as I can tell.
No, I think even back then that wasn't the case. I think he was just somebody that was really fucked up and didn't really know how to process his like fucking confused emotions. That's kind of what it seems like to me.
Sure.
An archetype of so many 20-ish-year-old guys that we've known. Fuck, that was probably me and you at one point. For
that's of course. And it's like, I can't, like, if he's not like that now, I can't be that mad about it, you know?
No, totally. And like the worst thing he ever did to a woman was during a show, he was accused of pissing on her during a show, which I don't really know what the motivation was. He never got convicted or even had like a fine or anything, but that was an accusation that he had. But it's just like maybe he had to piss and she was in the way. I don't fucking know. Like
That's wild, though. I didn't expect you to say that. I thought you were gonna say like that maybe he like shoved a person in her face or something. You know, like maybe it was like she got in his face and like he like didn't like it. You know, I didn't expect you to say he pissed on her.
And then, well, speaking of things that could be worse or better, so this album was produced by Terry Date, it was mixed by David Bendeth, and it was mastered by Ted Jansen. Now, Terry Date is somebody, Brian, who's probably like engineered or produced basically every album we've ever loved. Straight up. Like, he produced all of Pantera's 90s albums. He's produced, like, Deftones' first 4 albums and Ohms. He did fucking Astro Creep 2000 by White Zombie. He did Significant Other and Results May Vary. And Chocolate Starfish. We don't like Results May Vary, but whatever, by Limp Bizkit. He did Science by Incubus. He did See You on the Other Side by Korn, like a bunch of Soulfly albums, Smashing Pumpkin album, like a Slayer album. He's done so much.
You know which Pumpkins album?
I think it was Zeitgeist, I believe.
Zeitgeist tends to have awful production, but that's still cool. So basically, this is the guy who, like, he knows his way around, like, quote-unquote modern rock. Like, 90s, 2000s rock. Like, he's probably responsible for a lot of... I mean, if you could say you produced the 90s Pantera album, some of the greatest production in, like, metal ever, I would say. Which is baffling, because to me, this album sounds like shit.
Yeah. That's totally fair. That's totally fair. But speaking of, once again, maybe who are responsible for sounding like shit, but David Bendeth is somebody who mostly works in the metalcore and butt rock genre. That's what I put, because there's just a lot of bands I didn't even fucking care to write in here. But Ted Jansen, Brian, is maybe the most accomplished one here. Since 1976, Jansen has mastered 16 Grammy Award-winning albums, including such albums as The Eagles' Hotel California, Green Day's American Idiot, and Norah Jones' Come Away With Me. So, like, this dude's responsible for albums that have sold like 100 million copies.
Interesting. That's interesting, because when I listen to this album, and I'm looking over my notes from the last couple of days, and I see myself trying to grapple with it. There's something about this album where it's trying to, like, exist in, like, it is trying to exist in kind of the metal and hardcore community. You can sense that. But there's, like, this really, to me, kind of desperate sounding attempt to, like, show some ambitions beyond it. And there are moments where I think it works, but it does to me sound very confused. And to me, the idea of being like a post-hardcore band working with the Hotel California guy, like, that makes so much sense as to how this album turned out the way it did.
No, 100%. Now that you mention it, I'm like, yeah, I can 100% see that. And then the album is 45 minutes and 31 seconds long. And I've never really put this on here, but this is like the most successful album we probably ever reviewed commercially, so I wanted to include it. So it's certified platinum in Australia, gold in Canada, Germany, the UK, and the US, and it also peaked at number 11 on the US Billboard 200, 3 on the UK equivalent, and number 1 on the UK rock and metal albums chart. So this was a very commercially successful album, especially for where metal and rock were in 2013. So I got to give them credit for that. And on Amazon, it has a 4.8 out of 5, and on Rate Your Music, it has a 3.36 out of 5, which only made it the 449th highest ranked album for 2013, which I was kind of surprised by, because among the fandom, like, this is like the most universally loved Bring Me the Horizon album. Like, there's basically no detractors for this album on like the fan forums and like the Reddit that I found, whereas all the other albums had some varying degrees of like, I don't like this or I love this or whatever. But this was like the one that everybody was like, this is like the Bring Me the Horizon album that everybody loves.
And in terms of like hard rock in 2013 or whatever, this has to be one of the most commercially successful albums of the year.
Oh, abso-fucking-lutely it does. And also, like, you know, talk about metal trends that you don't like. Before we get into the track listing here and the Amazon reviews, this album is insanely influential to, like, modern fuckboy metal, as I'll call it. Like, every band from, you know, Bad Omens, we've talked shit about on the show before, but I'll be honest, they've started to grow on me a little bit, but they're not a band I love or anything like that. You know, Sleep Token, Spirit Box, all these bands, their trajectory would probably not exist without Bring Me the Horizon or this album, I'm gonna be honest with you. Even though this album is very clearly indebted to, like, Linkin Park, obviously. You can hear that very clearly here.
So that's interesting to me. I kind of want to get it out of the way, my overall feeling about this album, listening to it, because I think that sets us up nice for it. I don't understand if you're a fan of metal or hardcore, and I'm being sincere, I don't understand why you'd listen to this album. I understand if you were someone who primarily listens to, like, Sum 41 or, like, Blood on the Dance Floor, why you might listen to this. Because then you're like, oh, this is kind of heavy. It's kind of like, I can relate to it. But if, and I'm being sincere, if you're someone whose, like, thing is you're into In Flames or you're into like Under Oath or fucking something like that, I'm not sure what draws people to this album. But clearly, in the intervening years since, and maybe it's just because I'm older, I was the generation that heard this album, but I was kind of in another scene when it came out, so I wasn't primed for it. There is, and even you told me that before we listened to it, and I kind of doubted you, to be honest. And when I was listening to it, I was like, oh, this did influence a lot of bands that have come out in like the 10 years since. Like, it's immediately apparent, and that's interesting to me because when I listen to this, I can't think of myself as someone who loves like metal, and especially who loves like hardcore and things and post-hardcore. I can't see myself being drawn towards this, but clearly people are.
Well, you want to know who are clearly like into this, Brian? So here's a couple of the features on just the last two Bring Me the Horizon albums, Amo and Post Gen something or another. I can't remember what it's called at the moment. But Danny Filth of Cradle of Filth, Grimes is on a song on Amo. And as well, Little Uzi Vert, Post-Human Next Gen, that's what it is. Little Uzi Vert, Under Oath, and Glassjaw are featured on this most recent Bring Me the Horizon album. So talk about weird influence.
All artists who I admire to some degree. I'm not talking shit, but that to me is like, I guess like Lil Uzi Vert is younger than I am, and this might have been like an early metal release for him. Who was the first one we said before Grimes? It was someone I wanted to say.
Oh, Danny Filth from Cradle of Filth.
Okay, that makes sense because Cradle of Filth would have encountered, I like some Cradle of Filth, but they would have encountered similar like criticisms in like the metal scene that I'm sure like got levied at Bring Me the Horizon, that they were like this synth heavy band, that they were like for, not this isn't me talking, but there's people that are saying it's like for girls, it's not really heavy. So I could understand Danny Filth feeling like an affinity towards this type of music. That does make some degree of sense to me.
And also one I just remembered, and this is also my favorite song on Amo, they actually have a song that addresses some of the criticisms that fans have been levying against Bring Me the Horizon. It's called Heavy Metal. And honestly, the lyrics on that are way better than pretty much any of the lyrics in this album and Pray for Plagues. They're actually genuinely pretty funny because they have a rapper on that song too, who's like a, I don't know, hype man for the song, I guess, is Rozelle from The Roots.
Oh, see, like people love this band, huh?
Oh, people love this band. They're a big fucking band, dude.
And I'm not like a guy who's like a metal or hardcore purist who needs everything to be heavy and extreme. But like, so when I listen to this, I think actually that I'll bring it up more when there's moments in the album that highlight. It's such a strange brew of sounds.
It is, and that's the thing about Bring Me the Horizon, as I told you, like, even if what they're making is not good, they're always trying something. Like, they're always doing something interesting. Like, no album of theirs sounds the exact same as even the one previous. Like, I've never listened to a Bring Me the Horizon album and been like, oh yeah, this is just as I expected. Like, ever. It's crazy.
Which is admirable because for a band at their age with their level of audience, you could just be resigned to kind of like rehashing the same, like the hits, and it would probably pay off for you.
Oh yeah, they could be like a Red State fucking butt rock band. They could just do that 100%.
Yeah.
They could get away with it, to be honest with you, because they're once again, a very big band. I don't think they're quite on the level of like giant touring bands as like metal and rock bands as like, Slipknot or whatever, but they're pretty close to that level. Like if they wanted to do like a Bring Me the Horizon Fest, there probably would be a pretty massive set list of bands underneath them. Like they're a big fucking band for goddamn sure.
Within the quote unquote post-hardcore kind of scene for sure.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And you know what? I only have one Amazon review I want to talk about. There's actually two of them, but this one, now that I'm reading it, is not that interesting. But I got one, which actually I think, Brian, addresses some of your criticisms. So I think it's very interesting before we get to the track.
All right.
Here. So both of those were from the UK, and this one's from the UK too, of course. So, and I also did not want to include any other Amazon reviews because literally 90% of them were complaining about the physical release sucking. And they weren't even funny ones either. So I'm like,
that's our favorite.
They were so dumb. Like I had one that was like,
that's the vast majority of Bring Me the Horizon's fan base.
Yeah, it was really funny too because one of them was like, "You better not buy this in like South Wyoming because it's fucked up." And I'm like, "Why in South Wyoming?"
You think that like different parts of the country get different batches of the record?
Yeah. Are you telling me that like Northern Wyoming versus Casper, Wyoming gets a different Bring Me the Horizon physical release? Like who fucking wrote this? You know who wrote this, Brian? Is probably that KobraJFS guy or whatever the fuck. He probably wrote that. He lives in Wyoming.
Yeah, Cobra Owens.
Yeah. Oh, geez. But yes, so this review is from RG. They give us 5 stars. And the head of the review says, a bold statement that deserves respect. And the body of the review says, I am bemused as to why so many metal fans dislike this band. So I'm like, damn, Brian, they called you out immediately. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I'm interested. I'm curious to hear this defense.
Saw Shadow Moses on a music channel and thought that was the business. Got the album and was not disappointed. This band tried to write proper songs and have a great range and reach. They could have done an album of Antivis or Can You Feel My Heart. Instead, they tried to keep things varied, and it's a really cohesive album. I'm a long-standing metal fan, and there's a lot of craft and thought in this album. It's not Linkin Park. Come on, people. Well, there's actually a lot of similarities with Linkin Park in this album, whatever.
It's not as good as Linkin Park, but there's a lot of Linkin Park DNA in here.
No, absolutely. And if you think it's pop, you need your head examined. Well, there's objectively a few pop songs, especially Can You Feel My Heart is definitely a pop song, okay?
I look, the most interesting thing about this is how it tries to incorporate like pop influences. Like, it's not that heavy.
And he says, it's good, honest music trying to explore different avenues. That's no bad thing. And to be fair, I actually do kind of agree with that. There's a certain amount of varied lyrical themes in this album that we'll get into in the track listing. So I will respect somebody who especially was a dumb hot couch guy like Ollie certainly was.
Yeah.
You got to respect him from trying. And that's the thing, Brian. We always talk about dumb guys trying to be emotional. This is a dumb guy trying to be emotional, if you think about it.
So, okay, I know I've gone on record saying that's one of my favorite tropes. I love it. It's very meaningful. I find it really affecting. I don't have that feeling towards Ollie on this album. I don't think he sounds like a bad guy. It's just like, all right.
Yeah, no, totally. He honestly, well, he's like a dumb guy, but he's not like a dumb jock guy. He's like a dumb Reddit atheist. He's
like a dumb nerd, which is so much worse than a dumb jock or a dumb fucking like redneck trying to be deep.
That's totally fair. Because, yeah, he grew up as like an artsy kid in like Northern England or whatever. So
yeah,
it's not quite the same for sure. But the last two sentences
also, it is insane to me that so many bands like this are British, because I just do not think of people that make this type of music as being from the UK. Like, it's them and Black Veil Brides also, right?
No, they're from like Cleveland, Ohio or something.
Oh, are they? Okay, I'm thinking of someone else then. But yeah, I learned that Bring Me the Horizon were British, and I was like, weird.
Well, to me, the second you hear Ollie's vocals, especially in this album, it's like, oh yeah, he's British. He's 100% British.
Yeah.
Like, some British bands are able to hide their accent and stuff, but this band is absolutely not able to do that. Ollie sounds English as fuck, especially Northern English.
When he does his clean vocals, yeah.
Yeah, it's very obvious. Oh, but I'm sorry. Last two sentences here. Finally, I bought the album to support a British band. For the price of 2 beers, I've got a quality product that took years to perfect and execute. That's so value. Funny. And these guys deserve every bit of praise and support they get.
Bought it to support a British band. Be like it's a part of the local scene.
That's why I love a G8 country. They really need support. A culture that was like the most dominant pop culture thing for like 100 years and the dominant world superpower for even longer.
Based.
Damn, dude. That's like, yeah, I'd always love to support an American artist. And it's like, you don't need to, okay?
They're everywhere.
Why don't you support a Bangladeshi artist or something? Or like, I don't know, a Bhutanese artist or whatever. Like, that's the one that probably needs more support.
That would make sense, saying, I'm supporting this artist from the UK, which imported its culture all around the world for 100 years.
Yeah, that's fucking hilarious. Jesus Christ. Oh, God. But speaking of importing British culture, Brian, let's finally get into this track listing here. So the first song, Can You Feel My Heart? And I like the song a lot, genuinely. I understand the sort of lyrical themes he's going for, but the reason I love this song, Brian, more than anything else, right, is the meme. This was a big meme song, and I'm kind of surprised you didn't hear it before, because I heard this song on so many Instagram reels and TikToks and YouTube short things.
Yeah, not as far as I remember.
This was like the big song meme in like, I want to say 2022, 2023. Like every single one of those like short form video contents was like somebody being like Chad versus Virgin, and then it was like the Can You Feel My Heart like fucking sample part. Like that was the meme song for like a fucking year. I'm surprised you didn't hear that, to be honest.
You did send me a couple of those, and some of them were pretty funny. I thought I was glad to learn of a new meme.
Yeah.
So this song, I guess, for me, as the opening track and just as basically my introduction to this band, I do feel like it's one of the better songs on the album. And I do feel like it synthesizes and kind of states what Bring Me the Horizon are trying to do here well. I think so my take on this album's overall sound is it's sort of this blend of like melodrama and kind of like anthemic like pop rock with like sort of like some metalcore tendencies to give it some edge, and then kind of these with like synth textures to kind of make it stand out. And that doesn't always work, but I do feel like that's an overall good descriptor of what they're going for on the album. And I think it all comes together on this track better for me than on most of them. Big anthemic vocals, really reminiscent to me of Chester from Linkin Park, which I do say it as a positive in this case. You know, pretty heavy on the guitars, but really emphasizing kind of melody and chorus. I do want to say something about the synthesizers, about the keyboards on this album. They are the worst keys I've ever heard on a mainstream rock album. They sound so tinny. They sound so thin. They sound like, and they're all right. Like the guy can clearly play and knows his way around like synth pads and shit. But it's a lot of what they're doing on the synthesizers sounds to me really random. And I was reading about this album, and it turns out that the keyboardist joined on this album, and they consider him one of the main creative like drives of this batch of songs. And I was like, that's crazy to me, because to me the keyboard like parts on this album sound really amateurish and distracting. Having said that, I do think they work better on this track. There's a squiggly little keyboard line that kind of propulses the track along. It comes together pretty well. But just from a production standpoint, the keyboard sounds very tinny. I was amazed that this was on such a popular major label album that they let the keyboard sound like that.
I mean, hey, maybe people like it that way because clearly this song has this song on YouTube alone has 200 million views. Like people love this shit.
I mean, the thing is, I understand on this song, I do understand why people would love it. It's very, and that, you know what it's kind of like is like an 80s rock song, kind of like the Final Countdown or something, some like cheeseball mullet rock song with a really big anthemic chorus. This is like the millennial version of that.
No, 100%. And, you know, speaking of other millennial themes, Brian, let's get into the atheist stuff. I'm so excited. So this next song here is The House of Wolves. Now, I like this track, and also I loved the lyrics. And I have a choice quote from Ali about it because the song is atheist agnostic lyrics. Those are a common motif through a lot of the songs here, but his quote is hilarious. He said, "I was in a position where I was asked to believe in God, to get better, and I just couldn't understand that." So that's what I was writing about here. It's about how there's no salvation. There's no one that's going to save you. You've got to get better because you want it for yourself, your family, or friends, not because you believe there's a man in the sky. And you know what? You are now an honorary mod of our atheism, Ali. That was awesome. Yep. I love that.
Like, so musically, this is my personal favorite song on the album proper, I think. And I think part of that is because it doesn't so much try to do something really ambitious. It's pretty much like a melodic hardcore song. It actually reminded me a little bit of like Rise Against or something like that. There aren't really a lot of frills. There aren't a lot of like operatic sections. It's, you know, it's kind of them rocking out. So it was a little more accessible for me. Yeah, I didn't necessarily feel like they were biting off as much. As far as the lyrics, though, so in general, the atheist lyrics, the agnostic lyrics on this album are so fucking funny to me. Because, so in metal, in hardcore, in rock, in whatever, there's lots of ways to criticize religion that are interesting. You can criticize it from like a political standpoint of like, you know, the way that like Christianity is influencing like the conservative right and things. You can do it even from kind of a like smart ass, funny, like edgelord way, you know, like a punk band would have done, or even from like kind of a Marilyn Manson kind of transgressive, like using religious imagery to talk about sex kind of way. But all these anti-religious lyrics on here, they're basically like, you're fucking stupid for praying. That fucking sucks. Everything sucks, which to me is very funny.
No, it totally fucking is. And you know what? The other reason that I really, really love the lyrics on here, because these kind of like, I guess, atheist agnostic lyrics or whatever, to me, that was like how I was like as a child. So I love it for that reason, because it brings me back to my cringe days. I mean, I'm still cringy now, but definitely my other cringe days. And as well, Brian, I want to be very clear. So a lot of these lyrics are, of course, anti-religious on this album, because specifically this album was inspired by Ali going to rehab for a ketamine addiction. And he was just so mad that they made him try to do the 12 steps. That's why he was so mad they tried making him do the 12 steps specifically.
I did read that, and I thought that was interesting. See, that's valid, but one of the things with the anti-religious lyrics on this song is that it's kind of, you're totally right about it being like the Reddit atheist thing, because it's not just just like him saying, you don't need to do that to be good, or like, this isn't right for me. And it certainly isn't like, it's not from like kind of a philosophical anti-religious perspective like you might get from like a band like Christian Death. It's not like a political thing like you'd get from like Bad Religion. It's like he's like talking down to people that believe in God, which there might be reasons to do, but when you don't necessarily know that people were trying to force him to obey to a higher power, it kind of just sounds like he's like, you're stupid for believing in this. It's stupid that you believe in this thing and you look to it for guidance and strength. Everything sucks and you suck. It's kind of like, all right.
Yeah, it's like, damn. Does it make a lot more sense, Brian, that most of Bring Me the Horizon's fans are like very young now?
No, it made sense immediately because, as I said, listening to this, to me, this isn't music for like people that are into metal or hardcore. Even though it clearly is like influenced by those styles of music and it's kind of trying to exist in those spheres, this to me makes sense if it's like kids who mostly listen to like pop punk or like, especially kids that might listen to crunkcore. And then to them, this is like really heavy, real shit.
No, that makes a lot of fucking sense. Oh, geez. And the next song here is Empire, in parentheses, Let Them Sing, which I feel is like a sequel to the previous song, so there's not really too much to mention on my end. But I did have a little choice quote here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I do want to get your opinion on Ollie's interpretation of this. He says, it's quite Deftones inspired, the feel of it. Do you agree with that, Brian?
So I would not ever have specifically said that this song or any one song on this seems Deftones influenced. They clearly are influenced by like earlier nu metal. Like that's very apparent as soon as you listen to this album. But I wouldn't say specifically Deftones. I mean, I guess if I listen back to it, that might make some sense. I would say like Deftones and Korn, and then I would definitely say like Slipknot seem like a big influence to this band to me. So when you get to like this stretch of songs that starts here from the next few, I feel like you really see them kind of developing this thing that's like very melodramatic and almost kind of operatic, right? Like they're doing these really emotive, kind of almost theatrical songs. And I actually think that's reflected in the title, Empire, Let Them Sing. They're trying to do something very epic and grand. And mostly to me, it feels kind of messy. Like this song particularly does have kind of like a choral thing to it, which is, obviously being referenced to in the title, but also in the arrangement, there's kind of like, seems to be some aspirations to doing like sequences, kind of like almost like thematic sequencing. This is a very dramatic band. And there are bands who I think that sort of melodrama works for, including like the Smiths, or like I know you're a big fan of My Chemical Romance, and I think those are very theatrical bands who are very over the top emotional. I sort of feel like Bring Me the Horizon maybe are trying to exist in that space, and they're trying to reflect that melodrama in their music with all of the layers of vocals, especially with the keyboard parts, which again I just think sound kind of random and just not well thought out. But I know that's my big takeaway on this stretch is I feel like it's big melodrama.
Yes, very much so. And I think it actually leads perfectly into Sleepwalking, which is very similar to that. And I think this is the third song in the series that's literally about the ketamine addiction, and on top of it, the 12 steps thing on top of it. It's just very, very funny. And I don't really have too much to add musically to this one at all, but this, just a quick detail, this was the second single off this album, and Can You Feel My Heart was the last single on this album, which is crazy to me because that's like the big song now.
Yeah, that's crazy to me because listening to the album, Can You Feel My Heart is so clearly like one of the standouts. It's so far ahead of like most of the other songs on the album.
No, totally. And also, next track here, so Go to Hell for Heaven's Sake. Now, this is another one that you're obviously right, the operatic elements to it. There's a nice little quick solo that I liked, even though earlier Bring Me the Horizon albums, especially on Count Your Blessings, have a shit ton of solos, but not great ones. I'm going to be real here. The solos on that are very jerk-offy and like very much like, I don't know if entry level is quite the right word, but definitely not expert level solos. They're very like about kinda harmonics. Like harmonic
someone
scale.
Like a young metal guitarist who just learned how to solo and it wants you to know that they know how to solo. No, I agree. I like the short little, the brief little solo on this song. I think it adds a little bit of flavor, adds a little bit of punch. Really, to me, Empire, Sleepwalking, and Go to Hell for Heaven's Sake, they all kind of run together, which is not good or bad. It's just they all kind of fit into one big song. I'm going to say I hate the lyrics to this song. They're very much like emo kid lyrics. I did read along to most of the lyrics on this album as I listened to it, and these feels like he thinks the phrase "go to hell for heaven's sake" is very clever, and every time he says it, it just makes me mad.
Well, that's the thing. So the Ollie quote that I have here is, it's written to sound like it is about someone I don't like and don't want to have a connection with anymore, but it's a letter to myself, talking to the side of me that needed to be destroyed. And you know what? You're talking about emo lyrics. That's a very emo lyric thing to write about.
Well, and there's a lot of that kind of self-affirmation type themes on this album, which is kind of seems like he's maybe trying to do a thing similar to like an older hardcore band, or like even, that Suicide Silence album that we covered in the new metal series, something that's very like using a very personal experience to relate to people on a macro level and be really inspirational. As you'll recall, I wasn't like huge into the Suicide Silence album either, but I did think it accomplished like what it was attempting to do. When Ollie's trying to me to be very populist isn't quite the right word, but try to be very affirming to his audience and very like, hey, you can do this, you're strong. It really doesn't work for me because I think he seems like kind of an asshole in a lot of his lyrics.
Well, talk about populist, Brian. There's definitely a very populist song later on in the track listing here that I'm really excited to get to because I have a lot to talk about.
I know exactly what you mean.
But the next song on here, also Go to Hell for Heaven's Sake, was the third single off this album. And the very last track that has a single on this album was actually the very first single, Shadow Moses. Now, this, in my opinion, I think is easily the best song in the album for me, because not only is there the title drop in here, the song is very clearly in reference to the entire lyrical themes that are going on here. I love the MGS references and the lyrics and in the video. Like, to me, this is like kind of the perfect encapsulation of this whole album in a lot of ways. So this is why this is my favorite song in the album. I think it works very, very well. And this was like the first Bring Me the Horizon song that I actually remember like being like, oh my God, what the fuck? I used to hate this band. Now I kind of like this.
So that's really interesting because we have very different perspectives and very different histories, I think, with this album. But I basically feel the same thing. Shadow Moses is the best song on the album. I think that as far as like I said, I think there's this thing that they're trying to do of be like, well, we're like a heavy band. We're like a tough, cool band, but we're also kind of melodic and interesting. We're kind of like sensitive and we have some dimension. And I don't really think, to be honest, that they accomplish either of those things. But Shadow Moses is like the moment where, I talked about how in the 3 songs leading up to this, they're kind of doing this balancing act of trying to do this really operatic and anthemic, like heavy rock thing. And I do think Shadow Moses is like the one track other than Can You Feel My Heart where I think they really do pull it off. They do make all of those influences come together. Of course, it has the title drop, which is always fun in an album. I also think the lyrics to the song are a little bit better. So when I read them on paper, I was kind of, read them on my screen as I listened. I was kind of like, all right, like this song kind of, like he's put some thought into his word choices here. But also musically, I think it does come together more than any other song on the album. And probably a good point to mention, there's a crazy thing that haunts me about this album whenever I listen to it. Since we're talking about the mix of influences, there's such a big band in their scene, which doesn't compute with me, but it's interesting. It's such a unique and eclectic brew of influences from I think there's a lot they're pulling in from like thrash metal, from new metal, and from like 90s hardcore. I do think that there's like elements of like a band like Blood for Blood or something in here. And of course of, a band like Slipknot. But they sound, even though they're clearly in kind of that lineage to some way, they sound so wimpy, even when they're being heavy. And then the other side of that is that they're clearly trying to take some interesting kind of eclectic influences from electronic music and from pop music and from things you don't normally associate with heavy music, which normally is awesome, right? But even while doing that, they never sound heavy, but they never sound experimental to me, even when they're pulling from all of these different ends. It's very weird to me. It exists in this kind of uncanny valley of like genre mashing.
Well, that's the thing, Brian, is that you feel that way, and that's totally a reasonable thing to feel, especially with your reasoning. But yeah. I will say it's really funny that I think the bands that later on did this, outside of Spirit Box, because Spirit Box are fine, but Sleep Token and Bad Omens did this even more so, I think. Where they take these eclectic influences and they just don't work.
That's the thing.
Even though I do like some Bad Omens songs, to be clear, but Sleep Token, there's really nothing there for me. But Sleep Token and Bad Omens do that hardcore.
When you kind of lay them out as a band that influenced Sleep Token and Bad Omens, and again, Spirit Box, like you said, are fine. We saw them open for Cohen. It was a good time. I was like, oh shit, that makes so much more sense. Like Sleep Token and Bad Omens are kind of like they took the lessons of Bring Me the Horizon and they removed it even more from its roots in like underground music.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, Jesus Christ. But, and that's the thing, though, right, is that they're now doing, I don't think Bad Omens are doing much collabs, but, Spirit Box did a collab with Megan Thee Stallion. It was either this year or last year.
That's pretty fun.
I don't know if you listened to it. Did you listen to that one?
I haven't listened to that yet. I like Megan, though. I'm open to listen to that. I enjoyed seeing Sleep Token. I enjoyed seeing Spirit Box when I saw them. I have to check that out.
No, absolutely. And I had my own hot girl summer, Brian, okay? It was just me in a mankini or whatever.
In a mankini.
Well, speaking of Mankini songs, so next one here is Seen It All Before. Now, we both agreed this is the worst song in the album. I think this is not awful. I didn't hate it, but it's like it goes after the best song in the album, and it feels so, you talk about limp. This is the limp here. Like,
yeah, no, Seen It All Before definitely seems like kind of rote for me, kind of like going by the numbers type thing.
There's also a Phil Collins reference.
See, I didn't notice that till you pointed it out to me, and I was like, oh, damn, which makes sense because, again, very mimetic. You know, they were very clearly guys of a certain age were doing a little wink wink to the audience there. Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about Seen It All Before. I think it's fine. Like, we've reached a point in the album where they've kind of established what the tone is, and they're going to continue to deliver it. I would say, like, nothing in this song bothered me enough that I remember it and remembered having to talk about it. But most of the songs here at least have a couple things where they kind of hold my interest, and I can't remember anything from this one.
No, me too, honestly. I had to like re-listen to it. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a song that exists. But you know what? Yep. Speaking of songs that don't exist, we were talking about the Populist song earlier. Brian, we're getting now into Antivist.
I think we missed And the Snakes Start to Sing.
Oh, you're totally right. Never mind. And the Snakes Start to Sing is the least favorite song. Sorry, we totally fucked that up.
That is my least favorite song.
That's the one. We skipped it. We disliked it and didn't care for it so much we skipped it. Well, that's never mind.
Yeah, So it's kind of interesting that it's right after Shadow Moses, which we agree is like the most cohesive song on the album, right? They do kind of match that balance of like, we're a heavy band. We're kind of, I know they probably would never see this and their fans probably, they're kind of a pop punk band. They have some pop punk vocals. They have these big kind of sing along chants that you see at hardcore shows. They also have this electronic synth stuff going, and they kind of balance all of that, what they're doing on this album on Shadow Moses, right? And it's like they fly too close to the sun on the Snakes Start to Sing. It's almost like their attempt, at least the first half, at like a ballad. It takes forever to get going, and it seems like, and I'm already not inclined to love that, but like they're kind of like their melodic kind of aspirations they have on this album, they're kind of eclectic attempts. It's like they're really pushing those to their extremes on this track and really trying to be like a serious thematic band, and for me it sounds very daunting.
No, absolutely. And it's also the second longest song in the album at 5 minutes and 1 second. So they're already flying too close to the sun. They're making a 5-minute long song when this is the second longest song in the album. It just does not work. And you know what? We just talked about Seen It All Before. We confused it with And the Snake Starts to Sing. I don't think this one has really much of anything to talk about either, but this was the one with the Phil Collins reference, which is very funny to me. I love that. It's so funny. It's just like,
it's so of its time.
Collins. Yeah, so, because fucking The Hangover came out in like, 2009, 2010, I want to say. So it was a couple of years after the Mike Tyson scene. I'm talking about Mike Tyson again. He had a relatively rough week.
Aww. God bless
him. I mean, he made $20 million, so that's...
No, I know. He's fine. He's fine. No, the Phil Collins thing is very... It really does put a timestamp on this album if everything else about it didn't.
Yes. Well, speaking of Brian, we just talked about it, of course. The timestamp, the populism, everything. Now let's get into Antivist, which is also the shortest song in the album at 3 minutes and 13 seconds, which I think is absolutely perfect for this because this song tries so hard to be so edgy and it fails so bad.
It's so fucking funny. So what I will say is, like,
can I say the lyrics first, or do you have a point?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so the lyrics here, it's so good. The chorus is, middle fingers up if you don't give a fuck. I'm sick to death of swallowing every single thing I'm fed. Middle fingers up if you don't give a fuck. You think you're changing anything? Question everything. It's so good.
Like, it sucks. This is 2013? That's madness. To write middle fingers up if you don't give a fuck in the 2010s is crazy. And the lyrics get better as it goes on because they become weirdly specific in a way.
And also, by the way, to be clear, though, Ali says in an interview, I didn't put this one in here because this quote is way too long, but he says he was being sarcastic and ironic here.
I don't believe that.
I don't believe it either, but that is what he claims. That is what he claims. I'll just say that.
That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense for what the lyrics are. So what I will say musically is similar to House of Wolves. This is like musically one of the tracks that works a little bit more for me because it doesn't have as many of the frills, as much of the kind of genre mashing. It is kind of them rocking out, which... I don't know.
It's very new metal and metalcore too. On top of it,
it's very new metal and metalcore, and it's kind of like okay, they're just doing a rock song here, so there isn't quite as much that I find distracting on it. But I will say, like, the lyrics are so funny because it becomes, first of all, this is clearly about people online, right? It's about people posting and like him being mad at people that he sees on Twitter or something, right?
Yep, that's
which is
exactly what the song's
very,
about.
very 2013. That's so embarrassing. And there's also like this part where he says like, "Think I'm a coward who doesn't stand for or anything."
Oh no,
Well,
I
to
got it.
that
I got it right here, Brian. It's
oh,
so
thank you,
good.
thank you. Help me out.
So the second verse here is incredible. One of the best verses we've reviewed probably ever. It's great. It's, oh, give me a break, you deluded, ill-informed, self-serving pricks. If you really believe in the words that you preach, get off your screens and onto the streets. There will be no peaceful revolution, nor no war without blood. You can say I'm just a fool that stands for nothing. Well, to that I say you're a cunt.
Loser, loser. God, that makes me so mad. What the fuck are you talking about, you fucking baby? Like, what is he talking about? Who is he mad? Because you can tell he was, like, mad when he wrote it. He was like, you deluded, ill-informed, so-and-so.
By the way, you know for a fact he was mad at like a BuzzFeed article or video or something. You
Yeah,
know
and
that.
he was like, I'm gonna fucking rip them a new asshole. This is such bullshit. I can't believe this fucking world we live in. Everyone's on their fucking screens. Nobody's out in the streets. Everyone thinks they're so much better than me. For real, I had to ask you. I was like, is this song a defense of being like a political moderate? Because that's how I read it at first. I was like, is that what he's singing about?
It's so strange. I genuinely think, it's just like in America, Britain is pretty similarly politically like confused. I would not say as much so
Yeah.
because they have much more defined parties ideologically, or at the very least they did before like fucking Tony Blair and all that, right? But in the UK, there's also very similar dumb political guys like, you know what this is? I don't give a fuck what it is. I love fucking destroying the system. I love Bernie Sanders, but Trump's my guy. And there's a UK version of that, and this is what's going on right here.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So we've talked about the Linkin Park influence, right? Like for me, probably the most apparent influence throughout this album, although not necessarily on this song, is Linkin Park. These big anthemic vocals, these hybrid like metal pop choruses. But the other influence that I hear throughout this album, and I have no verification for this, is Rise Against, hardcore punk / Midwest emo band from the late 90s and early 2000s. They do a lot of big harmonies, a lot of tempo shifts, kind of like a thing Rise Against would do, and a lot of big earnestness. And I would say on the tracks that I've mentioned here that I think are a little bit more like straightforward rock songs, House of Wolves and Antivist, there's a lot of kind of skate punk vibes that I would kind of attribute probably to Rise Against or some other band like them's influence, which makes sense because I believe this album was distributed by Epitaph Records.
I believe so. Let me see here. I think you're right. Yep, Epitaph and RCA. Yep. So that makes a lot of sense. Oh, man. Yeah, like I said, I love this song. And then speaking of Brian, I think it leads perfectly into our next song, Crooked Young. I know how much you loved the lyrics on this one.
Listeners to the show probably know I think I'm really not like a hater. Like I find things to like in most things. If we're reviewing something for the show, I'm going to try to find something to enjoy about it because A, I have to spend the next week watching or listening to it or thinking about it. But B, it's just more interesting to review something when there's things. But there are points in the lyrics to this album where I get so annoyed. He sounds so whiny. He sounds like such a pussy. He sounds so full of impotent rage and so like sure that he's right about everything. And I know that's part of just like being in like an angsty rock band. And I've written like hundreds of songs that were much worse than these songs when I was a kid that were the same way. But like Crooked Young is a song that probably more than Antivist I listen to and I just think like, shut the fuck up. What the fuck are you talking about?
Oh, can I say the lyrics? Because this is another one I have to say the lyrics for because they're so funny. So the first verse is, Hallelujah, well, I'm saved. Just a dozen steps in 28 days. It's a miracle I'll be born again. With the Lord as my shepherd, I will find a way. Fuck your faith. No one's going to save you. Fuck your faith.
So this is the worst way to protest religion. You could be political. You could be edgy and like funny and gross. You could be like kind of more from a philosophical. But basically to me, it's like I'm to a point in my life where I'm an atheist, but I have like I'm interested in like religion or whatever, or thinking about religion in terms of philosophy sometimes, But it's kind of like he's doing this thing where he's not really offering anything. He's not offering any critique of what religion's done, and he's not really offering any alternative to it. He's basically saying like, you're stupid if you believe in religion, which is clearly like for a lot of people like this very positive force in their life, especially for some people who are addicts, and 12 steps can be bullshit and it doesn't work for people. And it sucks to try to force people or pressure people into it. Like, of course that sucks. But when you don't know that, when you listen to the songs about religious on this album, it's like, I can just imagine him talking to some like goofy middle-aged Ned Flanders guy and be like, you're fucking stupid. No one's gonna save you. You're gonna rot in the ground. It's like that Mark Maron bit where he talks about like, what do I get for like convincing my Christian friends that God isn't real? And I'm like, your life is a lie. Now I'm going to go tell all my shitty friends. Like, what do I get from that? I make him feel like shit and then I feel like shit too.
I like it. Listen, it's one of those things, right? Where even though it's cringe and it's stupid, I was 13 years old and an atheist. I get it, okay? But you're also like a 28, 27-year-old man. It's a little cringe.
Yeah. No, I
Just
mean,
a
I
little
get
bit.
it. I've had that phase in my life, but it's like if he was 28 when he made this, it's kind of like, all right, dude. Like maybe there's other ills in the world that you should be paying attention to more than like religion is for dummies.
It's a very 2000s to early 2010s online complaint, which, to be fair, I mean, we shit on Reddit atheists a lot in this episode, but we've mentioned on other episodes, they were mostly right. Like, they were like 90% right, I would say, in their critique.
They were ahead of the track in basically all of their, like, critiques of, especially about, like, the neocons and the kind of looming right-wing power structure. Yeah, I mean, it's good that those people exist, but, man, they make for bad lyrics.
No, they absolutely fucking do. Jesus Christ. And you know what? That leads into our final song here. By far the longest. This is an almost 7-minute long song. 6 minutes and 44 seconds long is Hospital for Souls. Now, I do think, even though we've had a lot of complaints about the lyrics and about just the redundancy of a lot of this, though, I do personally think that this is a great ending for this album. I think it ties everything together perfectly for the end here.
So this is one of what I would say are 3 tracks on this album that really understand and pull together this sort of very specific tone that they're looking for. Like, we were talking about the producers and how one of them has a lot of history in kind of like metal and alternative rock, and the other one has history in these big blockbuster genre-defying records, and how this album seems to be kind of grasping for both of those things. I would say there were 3 tracks on this album, Can You Feel My Heart, Shadow Moses, and Hospital for Souls, that kind of put their hands around that concept, where they're pretty heavy, they're very melodic. Most Bring Me the Horizon songs, at least based on this album, are very melodic and very anthemic. And they do find these kind of operatic things to do and to make them work kind of sequentially. I think the lyrics to this song are pretty good, to the point that it kind of makes me think that he might have written them first, like before most of the other album, just because they feel so much fresher than a lot of the ideas lyrically on the rest of the album. I do think it's too long for me as someone who's like not a fan of the band, but I understand that if I was more like into this style of music, I would probably be like, fuck yeah, this would sound really epic and grand. And I think mostly it does.
Yeah, even though I'm obviously a much bigger fan of this than you are, like I said, I think this hit really perfectly for it. And also just the ending too. It's kind of like a cry of just being like, especially in the throes of addiction, I can imagine. As somebody who's never been addicted to anything, honestly, except for like, you know, I'm a middle-aged white woman, so I'm very addicted to chocolate. You know, I'm fucking around. But as somebody who's never really been like an addict or anything like that, I can imagine those lyrics at the very end of this track, like, is probably how somebody feels in like the throes of addiction, who's like hit rock bottom and trying to get better. So I like that quite a bit.
Yeah, I actually won't get too much into it. I liked the lyrics here. I think they do capture a sort of feeling. There was sort of, first of all, I would say these lyrics back away from the kind of aggro posturing of a lot of the other tracks, and they kind of they're more authentically vulnerable. Where I feel like sometimes all these lyrics on this album kind of like, they have a veneer, like the idea of vulnerability, but they aren't actually all that. They all have their defenses up. This is a song that seems to be about like, I'm in this place where like, it is about being wounded and broken. And the lyrics to me still seem kind of cringe, because that's just how I feel about a lot of this band's lyrics, but they do seem very genuine, and they really do, I think, capture that feeling, especially in kind of a hot couch guy way. And, you know, we love our hot couch guys. We support them all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think he's definitely one of the more emotionally open and I would say better writing hot couch guys. But he is, at the end of the day, very much a hot couch guy.
Well, like, okay, so in the 2010s, hot couch guys pivoted to this and into being like a guy, maybe kind of like The Weeknd. Whereas prior to the 2010s, the hot couch guys were like I mean early Weeknd when I say that. But like prior to the 2010s, you couldn't really quite be like this guy openly as a hot couch guy. You had to be like kind of like a D12 guy, right? And then maybe in your heart, you felt this way, but you never said it.
No, fuck it, totally, absolutely. So, but yeah, speaking of hot couch guys, we're 2 hot couch guys who just finished this review. So before we get to our pluggables, Brian, do we have any final thoughts?
So I actually, because I listen to this on Spotify, and the only version on there is the quote-unquote expanded edition, which has 2 bonus tracks. And even though I knew we weren't going to talk about them for the album, I did listen to them. But I do have to say, my favorite track of the 13 songs I listened to for this album, my favorite track by them was Join the Club, which was one of the bonus tracks. And I felt so cheated by that. You know, my favorite tracks on here have been like House of Wolves. I don't really like Antivist because the lyrics bug me too much, but musically it's closer to a thing I would would be into. But Join the Club is really, it feels to me very skate punk. It's just a tight, like riff driven rock song. It's got a pretty catchy chorus. So that, I would say the two songs that like worked for me where I was actually kind of nodding my head and going like, okay, were House of Wolves and then Join the Club, which is, I'm pretty sure, another song about like the relationship between religion and like rehabilitation and like the pressuring of people to like submit to a higher power or whatever. But yeah, so musically, I would say that was a track that worked for me. It doesn't really reflect the big operatic sound of most of this album. It's closer to Antivist or House of Wolves than to, say, Shadow Moses or whatever. But I liked it pretty well. So I just wanted to give that a shout out. My final thoughts on this band, or at least on this album, are, again, to me, this sounds like a band for like people, like younger people at the time who probably didn't listen to a lot of metal or hardcore. Like, it takes all of these different influences from things that were leading up to the 2010s. There's a little bit of pop punk, there's a little bit of emo, there's a little bit of like Fugazi post-hardcore, especially in the drums, which to me are the only instrument on here that really like stands out. This drummer is fantastic. He does some really cool stuff with kind of like tempo shifts and things, and just kind of cool complex rhythms that always stay on beat and are kind of danceable. And, you know, I don't know, not synth pop, but kind of like almost like rave culture synthesizers, chip tune kind of sound. You know, like I said, it's a very tinny synthesizer. But what you end up with, to me, when I was listening to this, I was like, oh, if you were a Warped Tour kid who didn't really listen to metal, you probably would listen to this. But if you're someone like, you know, and I know this isn't the case, Taylor, because you love metal. You're probably the biggest metalhead I know. But if you're someone who listens to Slipknot or Pantera or something, it's kind of hard for me to imagine what there is for you in Bring Me the Horizon, because they seem so soft. And I'm not, you know, I like a lot of soft music. I feel weird saying that as a criticism, but it's crazy to me that they're so influential, because when I listen to this, and it makes me feel like an old man, even though this is my generation, I'm like, I don't know, this is actually a thing that I don't get.
Yeah, because most of the guys in this band are only about, they're in their 30s. They're our age.
They're our age, yeah.
So, but no, absolutely, yeah. So, you know, some of my final thoughts, like I said, this is a band that I don't love, I don't hate. They're a band that is just so polarizing to me. That was the word I was trying to get for earlier, polarizing. Like, I hate Count Your Blessings.
That makes sense.
I don't really like their more quote unquote metalcore, because they do actually have more like traditional, like late 2000s, early 2010s metalcore stuff on their 2008 album and 2010 album. I can't remember what those are called. No, one of them is called Suicide Season, and I can't remember what the other one's called. That's also, once again, very elderly millennial name, I know. But the thing for me is that, like, I think the older they've gotten, generally, the more I've liked their material. This is generally, like, what I consider to be their kind of renaissance period, to where they're actually making, like, albums that are pretty much universally loved. So, for this example, like I said, this is their most universally loved album by the fan base. I can't hate. Next one is That's the Spirit, which is actually my favorite Bring Me the Horizon album. I think it's, like, genuinely an amazing pop rock, metalcore. There's some new metal songs on it. It's very varied, and I think it's much more of a realized album than this. I think it's a fucking fantastic modern quote-unquote metal rock, pop rock, whatever the fuck you want to call it, album. I think That's the Spirit is incredible. I've listened to that album probably around 10 times in my life, and I think it's great.
This is interesting for me, because this is a type of music that was big when I was like the age, and I guess on paper I was like the target demo for it. I was like this angsty kid who was into like rock and was like sad and whatever, and I was this really angsty kid who liked, and I did like some like corny Warped Tour shit. It wasn't like I was like altogether too cool for this type of music, and just for whatever reason it didn't hit me. It's interesting. I just turned 33 this month. It's interesting going back to this music that I never really listened to, with the hindsight of knowing that it was hugely influential to the generation after.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in the same way that Linkin Park is obviously very influential to this album, that nowadays Bring Me the Horizon is extremely influential to, like, so much, like I said, modern metal and like pop metal and all these fucking things. Like, basically every band you can think of that is like quote unquote like a really popular like pop metal band now kind of sounds like this, and That's the Spirit. It's crazy to me that there's just so much influence. Somebody who doesn't really listen to a lot of that type of music, but whenever I hear like, you know, Coworker metal, they're like, oh, I'm into this fucking band, and I'm like, all right, let me listen to it, and I'm like, oh, I hear Bring Me the Horizon. Like, almost every single time they'll say something like that. It's crazy. I'm like, oh yeah, that's definitely Bring Me the Horizon. I hear it every time. So yeah, and we will get to That's the Spirit eventually, not in the next like probably like 5-10 episodes, but we will get to That's the Spirit eventually because that's an album that I do want to cover because I genuinely think it's everything that this album does, but I think better in my opinion.
Well, and I think we have to because we've now kind of set a tradition of like we talk about kind of music that's adjacent to hardcore and to metal in pairs, and we kind of look at like elder millennial classics, which this, inarguably is one of, I can't dispute that. And then we look at kind of like the roots of them or something. And another weird thing about it is like there are like threads that I don't know if they consciously picked it up from this or if they picked it up from someone else. There are threads from like 90s metalcore and like New York hardcore. Like the breakdowns to me feel kind of like a dumbed down version of like Coalesce breakdowns, for instance.
Yep.
There's a lot of big chanting choruses that almost sound like something you would hear from like Crown of Thorns or like 25 to Life or something, which is not really what this band sounds like. But it's interesting how like those sorts of bands, something carried on through from their DNA down to like this type of like scene kind of mallcore thing, which I don't know if these are actually related, but to me, I think of like Bring Me the Horizon in the same way I think of like Black Veil Brides and like Attack Attack and shit like that.
You know what, Brian, you just mentioned Black Veil Brides and Attack Attack. Even though I do agree, I think the fan bases of them are pretty similar. Black Veil Brides was not a very influential band at all, but you know who was a very influential band, Brian, was Attack Attack. And you know what? We're doing our influential album series. I'm kidding. We don't actually have to make this into a series, but if we do, Brian, Someday Come Suddenly by Attack Attack will definitely have to be on there somewhere because that was an extremely influential album, and I'm not even bullshitting. I'm genuinely serious.
I would be interested to do that because I have my own kind of long list of albums that I've picked that are kind of albums that are not albums by millennials, but they're albums that kind of, I think, pave the way for a lot of that. And there's definitely some stuff that I have in mind that I think would pair nicely with Attack Attack.
Oh, God. Brian, by the way, Brian, have you listened to Someday Came Suddenly?
No. Yeah, I know two songs by them. I know Stick Stickly and Shred White and Blue.
Yeah, the actual album opens up with a crunkcore opener. If you didn't remember, this was made in like 2008.
And someday we'll do some sort of discussion on crunkcore. Like for real, bands like Black Veil Brides, Bring Me the Horizon, Attack Attack. To me, that's like heavy music for kids that listen to crunkcore.
100%, especially early Suicide Silence. I would totally agree with that. I wouldn't say like, modern Suicide Silence, but definitely 2000 Suicide Silence for sure.
To me, it's like there's no way in my mind, and I know this is wrong. This has been proven wrong, that someone who's like grew up on like Metallica or the Cro-Mags or Motorhead or whatever would listen to this. But someone who listens to Fun Forest 5 and what's the fucking, not the pedo band, but the other big one, the other big crunkcore band, Broken Sad. Someone that listens to that would probably listen to that like quote unquote post-hardcore stuff and be like, oh yeah, this is heavy.
The other pedo one is Blood on the Dance Floor.
Blood on the Dance Floor. I just
remember, dude, by the way, another very cringe elderly millennial moment. Do you remember when everybody piled on a 12-year-old who had been raped by Davi Vanity and she almost committed suicide? Remember how cool that was? I remember how awesome we were for that?
Insane moment in time. Also, like, just that this guy, like, I know there were a lot of creeps and perverts in the screamo or emo pop punk scene, but that guy was, like, pretty openly a pedophile, and everyone was like, yeah, that's kind of weird, but, and his music was not good. Also, so I was thinking about this not that long ago. The weird thing with like Blood on the Dance Floor is that he like curated an image specifically for like little children. When you listen to his music and you look at his soul vibe, you're all like, you could argue that some pop punk or some kind of indie rock like Brand New, obviously that guy turned out to be an asshole, but they were like a pretty good band, and you're like, oh, I could see how this guy was kind of curating his sound to like appeal to like young women and teenage girls who were kind of like sad and thoughtful. Davi Vanity is literally like that for like 9-year-olds. It's insane.
Yeah, it's massive. But before we get too much into the depths of depravity, which is crunkcore, which I think we can all agree is the depths of musical depravity in a lot of ways, let's get into our pluggables, which are very depraved. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well, please, as always, please subscribe and follow us on both our Spotify and our YouTube channel, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well as always, please donate to Lucifer and the Father campaign. It is not depraved at all. I want to be very clear. It is not depraved. Our good friends are creating a wholesome series, and they need your moral and financial support.
And I think we've said this in the past, but I was saying, like Taylor and I are both like not religious people, but I genuinely like I enjoyed that pilot to Lucifer and the Father. I think it was really ambitious. I think they're trying to do something really interesting and do an interesting format, and I really admire what they're trying to do. Please consider donating. Go check out the pilot and watch it, and throw a couple bucks that way. Because Taylor and I, as we say every show, we will match within reason whatever you get, what you guys want to donate. These are friends of the pod. It's also like we talk all the time about how modernity and late capitalism has made it virtually impossible for artists, independent artists, to do something cool and ambitious. So, like, these guys have been nice to us, and they're trying to do something cool and ambitious. We should help them out.
No, 100%. Absolutely. So, and we talked about reasonable. That's like $20-$25 to be clear. We're not talking about $500 $1,000. It's $20-$25. But if you send us an email or, post on YouTube or just do anything and just show us that you donated to them, just a screenshot or anything, we will match that donation up into a reasonable amount.
Which, think about that. If 2 of you listening donate $25, then that's $100 towards it.
Exactly.
Is my math right on that? Yeah.
Yes, 2 times 4. Yeah, 2 times 2.
Yeah. Thank you. As well, follow us at Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram and Threads. The accounts are tied. Threads is popping. I'm going to tell you. I was a Twitter user, and before that, a Something Awful poster for a long time. And as Twitter got worse, I was very bummed out that I didn't have a place to just post out nerd shit. And I hate to do an advertisement for a Facebook-owned app, but I can just post about some nerdy thing I'm interested in at Threads, and then hundreds of people see the post or whatever. And you start talking to people about music or movies or whatever. It's pretty fun. Follow Millennials Are Old Pod on Threads. It's a good time. And also on Facebook, where, I share posts from Boomer Facebook groups. I gotta check in on them and see how they're doing.
No, absolutely. They're always so full of cool people. I mean, one day we will genuinely reach out to the Billy Jack fan page so we can complete our 5th and final episode of the Billy Jack series.
Well, so here's the thing. I think listeners of the show probably have figured this out about me. I kind of like boomers. I think that most boomers have done more in their life and have a little bit more blood in their veins than millennials do. All the stuff that we criticize boomers for, guess what? Millennials ended up the exact same way in like a third of the time span and with less to show for it. So
yeah, way less money and way less resources, way less respect. Because boomers just like millennials be doing this, and they're just literally talking about things that 9-year-olds do.
Yeah.
But speaking of things that 9-year-olds do, Brian, I think it's time for us to go to bed like 9-year-olds do. And to be fair, 9-year-olds and Bring Me the Horizon fans have a lot in common. I'm kidding. That's the hate, because I want the Bring Me the Horizon haters to come. I really do. I'm so excited.
Well, I don't need to go to bed because I got to take several naps when I was trying to listen to this album.
Ollie Sykes. I said I like this album. That's a real psych moment. I don't like it.
Ollie sucks, right?
Yeah, Ollie sucks. Yeah, by the way, that is 100% a thing a 13-year-old said to another 14-year-old.
He hates it. He makes it. Yeah, that other 13-year-old wrote like a song about it, and that's how Antivist was created.
Bring Me the Horizon, more like Bring Me the Shit. They're fucking gay, dude. That was 100%
like, Bring Me the Toilet, because I'm about to shit.
That's something AVGN would say. He's like, I really listen to a fucking shitty album, Sempiternal. It makes me want to shit.
Bring Me the Toilet, because I'm going to evacuate my bowels.
Oh, Jesus Christ. We could really make this a bit. And then fucking Mike Matei dresses up as Ollie Sykes. He does like a horrible British accent.
Hey, we have a nice thing going on. Let's not bring motherfucker Mike into it.
Totally. Well, speaking of things that motherfucker Mike will not be involved in, it is now time for us to end the episode and go to sleep. So have a good night, everybody. And if you're Bring Me the Horizon fan and you hate this, please post in the comments. I want to see them. I want to see all of them. Please.
Yeah, hit me up on Threads.
Yeah. All right, have a good night, everybody.